we'll just do a quick introduction. So I'm Analies. I'm Hydroviv's head of policy and perspectives. And then we're so lucky because our founder took some time today to talk about this really, really important topic. So Eric, if you just want to introduce yourself
Yeah,
a
of
little bit.
course. So, yeah, my name's Eric Roy. I'm the founder and I guess chief scientist at Hydroviv. So it's funny that you say it's an honor. I'm really just kind of taking a pause from my boring day job to do something fun. So I'm happy to be with you, Annalise.
Well, good. I'm glad. So we at Hydroviv have been needing to talk about this for the past couple of weeks. So I'm really, really glad that we're doing that today. Basically, this news story broke in The Guardian that PFAS were present in hundreds of municipal water systems across the country. So we've kind of been waiting for something like this to happen because we've known that, PFAS are problematic everywhere. But this Guardian story really made the public aware, made municipalities have to kind of start taking accountability and figure out a plan. So that being said, today we're going to be talking specifically about Wayland, Massachusetts. And that's because they recently told their constituents that PFAS is all of a sudden a problem in their drinking water. It's present in multiple wells, so wells that they draw for municipal water. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about Massachusetts standards, kind of where we're at the federal regulatory level, because PFAS are not regulated federally. Some states are kind of, taking initiative, but we'll get into that. So I think, Eric, let's kind of start with big picture, why all of a sudden Wayland is, ringing the alarm to their constituents as of April 1st.
It's about time, right? I mean, that's the reality of it. Like you said, this is the result of the media deciding to shine a spotlight on this. This is not new information, right? So anyone who's been working in environmental policy, environmental toxicology, public health, they've known about this a long time. This is like lead. So I mean, yeah, it's a story in Wayland because the municipality and the local media decided to kind of make it a story. It's not like the water all of a sudden got, was introduced to this problem. This has kind of been there a while, and it's just shining a flashlight in a corner that has been dark for a while.
Yeah. So I think before we talk about the specific regulations to Massachusetts, I think that it's important to kind of talk about where this contamination came from, because sometimes it's like glaringly obvious, right? Like in North Carolina and Fayetteville and Brunswick County, it was really obvious where this contamination was coming from. The Chemours plant in Fayetteville. But a lot of times it's not as obvious, and it's not as, like the information isn't as readily available. So the Wayland, I actually did a bunch of digging and it was really, really interesting. So I won't go into a huge wormhole here, but PFAS are used in manufacturing of non-stick, non-repellent surfaces.
They're useful chemicals, right? I
Yeah,
mean, they're useful. I mean, they're useful, but there's a trade-off, right? And we're just now kind of focusing on the downside. So, yeah.
yeah, yeah. So in Wayland, there are two major sites where this contamination came from. And I think it's also important to mention this because if you live in a different municipality that the Guardian article shed light on and you're wondering, where did this contamination come from? It's important to know the types of industries that are associated with PFAS. So in the 50s in Wayland, there was this like missile manufacturing company that was operated by the US Army. There was also a Raytheon lab that was doing munitions testings and things of that nature. And that was going on starting in the 50s. So it's 2021, Massachusetts and the rest of the country is just kind of finally ringing the bell on this and ringing the alarm. But we've known about this for a very, very, very long time. So yeah, it's a total mess. I won't get too far into the weeds here, but some independent contractors came in to this site trying to assess if PFAS was actually a problem. They had like conflicting results. And that's just kind of how the story goes. It's that like, we don't really have that like federal structure of how to tackle these hazardous waste sites that have been operating since the 50s. And we just don't have like a plan for PFAS mitigation really. So.
Well, they don't need to, right? They haven't had to. So, I have a nagging suspicion that this is going to be one of those things where you can basically copy and paste this story into pretty much any, local area that gets their water from the ground, or, they have a history of manufacturing in their area. I mean, this is the same story as PCBs were. This is the same story, with that type of stuff. So, I mean, yeah, when you have a chemical and you dump it, like there are consequences of doing so. That's just the reality.
Yeah.
And while we're glad, Massachusetts obviously has a really, really long history of manufacturing and tech and industry and stuff like that, and there are consequences when you let people dump their waste.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to give Massachusetts a little bit of credit here, because they they are one of the few states. I think there's about like 13 states that are either have set a standard for PFAS or are in the process of setting a standard for PFAS. And their standard for 6 total PFAS variants is 20 parts per trillion. The federal health advisory level is 70. So,
Is it 20 individually for each one, or is it?
It's 20 total.
Right. So I mean, it's much more strict than the federal standard, right? Because the federal standard is 70, and it's really just looking at, I mean, historically anyway, it's just kind of looked at PFOA, PFOS. Now, obviously, right. UCMR, was it 3 or 4 when they introduced some of the other ones in there, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, like I'll give partial kudos to this, but ultimately, if you just because you put like a level on there, it's like, it doesn't. You can't just wave a magic wand and say, ta-da, we have no more PFAS, right? So you actually have to solve the problem. So,
yeah.
Okay, are municipalities going to be able to get those PFAS down in a cost-effective way?
Right.
That remains to be seen. I know that, when we look at North Carolina, they're spending $1 billion on a municipal RO system or like upgrades to municipal systems, and it costs money.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, and it was kind of like clockwork. Like as soon as this regulation in the state of Massachusetts rolled out, we all of a sudden started seeing towns pop up with advisories out to their constituents, being like, "Hey, this is now a problem.
Right.
Been a problem for decades, but now we have to tell you."
Yeah, now we actually have to tell you about it. Like we've been deliberately not looking at it for a long time because we haven't had to, but now that we have to tell you it exists, we're consider this a disclosure. Like somehow that's okay.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So yeah, I think now is a good time, and like one of the main reasons that I wanted to have you join this call is just kind of removing PFAS. You started to touch on it on the municipal level. So I think it would be good to talk about that, why it's difficult. And then we can also kind of talk about the residential side of filtration. And, do all water filters remove PFAS? Just kind of let's get into the filtration.
You brought in the chemist, talk chemistry.
Yes,
I'm into it.
absolutely.
All right, so here's the deal. Like, first thing just to call out, we say this a lot in our messaging and stuff. Even though PFAS is just like 4 letters, we're really talking about a class of thousands of chemicals, right? Massachusetts has decided to regulate 6 that they're calling, right? So Massachusetts is regulating the 6. When you have a giant class of chemicals, we have reason to believe that they're all toxic, but they have very, very different properties to them. And the properties are what make it really, really hard to remove from water. Okay, so if you're looking for a solution to the problem, media is shining light on the problem. People are acknowledging that there's a problem. Okay, how do you fix it now? And when you look at some of the regulations around PFAS and removal of PFAS, you find that a lot of the efforts are focused on really the individual chemicals that are actually easy to remove from water. So one of the things that are differences among the different PFAS chemicals is like how long the chain length is. Are these big molecules or are they small molecules?
Right.
Generally speaking, big molecules are easier to remove from drinking water using just granulated carbon or something like that.
Yeah.
Whereas the short chain PFAS, a lot of them are highly, highly soluble, which makes them much more difficult to remove from water. And those removal technologies are often a lot more expensive. So when we're looking at, at the municipal level, they want to remove PFAS at the municipal level. It's not going to happen. So they're going to be able to set up, activated carbon beds and stuff like that, and that will do a good job kind of taking some of them out, especially the easy ones to measure. But remember, there's thousands of these compounds. The environmental activists are really calling for these to be regulated as an entire category, which that's a great aspiration that is sound from a public health perspective, but it's just nearly impossible to do on the municipal level as a category. It's just not practical. And then when you consider that 99 or 98% of the water used in a home does not get drank, it's used for something else, you have to ask yourself the question, like, is removing it at the municipal level at an enormous cost with huge trade-offs, because you're only getting the things that are easy to remove, is that really the right strategy? And obviously I would argue it's not. I think you should prioritize the water that goes in your mouth.
Yeah.
That's
a really,
it's hard
really
to regulate around it, right?
Yeah. And just to kind of reiterate what Eric just said, is that our focus, I think, right now in the regulatory space is, and this is kind of a generalization, but it's really, how do we fix a treatment plant to make it remove this contaminant and spend billions and billions of dollars doing so, when a lot of the water goes through the pipes, is flushed down the toilet, down the shower, whatever it is. And also, we don't really know much about PFAS and dermal exposure. Ingestion of drinking water is the top priority right now.
Absolutely.
For public health officials. So yeah, I think that's a really, really good point, is just like how our strategy is, it's not really feasible, and also it's not prioritizing public health and exposure from ingestion.
So it's like when the same entity gets to set the bar, like what is the threshold, and like do the thing that's providing the solution, it's kind of like, well, you get to say how good you have to be, and you're using someone else's money to get there. So it's I obviously side eye with a lot of this, but like and then what typically happens is you zoom out to the 30,000 foot view and say, we want safe water. Well, it's like, of course, but what does that actually mean from an engineering perspective? And how are you going, like, what is the line of safe versus unsafe? So it's a good first step, but it's not. If an operational strategy requires you to make compromises on the outcome that you're actually aiming for in the name of convenience, but you're doing so at an astronomical price, I mean, you have to question the strategy, right? Like, but on the other hand, municipalities really, where they can actually go in and regulate is at the municipal level, and that's what EPA can place mandates on. So it's what is enforceable versus what is actually delivering the closest thing to the desired outcome you want. There's trade-offs with that. So
and I think, just to draw just another comparison, obviously lead is a very different contaminant than PFAS.
It's a different animal.
it's a different animal, but like what you're saying is really similar to what the country is going through with the lead crisis. Like obviously Biden just released this huge infrastructure plan. Sorry, this cat just jumped up. Okay, no worries there. So obviously Biden just released this infrastructure plan. We're trying to figure out how to tackle lead. And what you're saying is a lot. It's similar to when you testified in front of Congress about this lead issue. And again, I feel like the focus and emphasis was really on municipal filtration. So just kind of like that's the way we're thinking right now. But I do want you to just briefly mention residential filters. Obviously, yeah. Hydroviv is a water filtration company.
Yeah. Full disclosure, we have an obvious conflict of interest here, but I'm not going to lie to people. I mean, that's just in science, all you have is your name, right? So, look, regulation takes time. So even if they hit go on this, if the municipal scale stuff works, there's still time before it gets implemented. Obviously, Hydroviv, we work in the residential space. We chose not to work in the municipal space. We focus on point of use filters, and that's not from a money-making perspective. We'd make way more money selling to municipalities, but I really just do believe it's the right tool for the job. So if you are interested in removing PFAS from water, what I highly, highly, highly recommend, point of use filter, again, prioritize the water that goes in your mouth, and get something that's NSF certified, NSF standard 53 for PFOA, PFOS. Those are again, as we kind of talked about, those are the easy things to measure, but there was also, NSF doesn't have other standards for other PFAS compounds right now, so that's the best that the industry standard has. However, there have been universities and some local governments that have run some studies on point of use water filters as well. These were straw purchases. We are not involved in any way, shape, or form with Duke University or NC State, but they did buy, or we had customers who bought our filters, and those were evaluated by some Duke and NC State filters along with others. Some filters did very well. Some filters did atrociously. And it's really kind of interesting to see how that plays out. So again, like NSF is a really good starting point, because if brands spend the money to invest on certifications and get above board on that, there's a better chance that they'll actually do a good job on stuff, I would say. But look at the results that Duke and NC State did. Like we're not affiliated with them. We didn't pay them. They didn't pay us. Our filters did very, very well, as did a lot of reverse osmosis systems. So if you're looking at, in a short term, if you're looking for a short-term solution that works, point of use filters, that's the only game in town right now.
Yeah. I think that was, super informative. And we will link the, that Duke NC State study in our bio. And I would highly suggest at least using that as a point of reference.
Absolutely.
NSF, when you're purchasing a filter, if you live in Wayland or anywhere else in the country, that Guardian article kind of shed light on.
And can I just say one more thing, Analies? Yeah. So one of the things, like obviously we monitor our competitors' marketing and stuff like that. We are seeing an increased level of kind of like mushmouth messaging in kind of the water filter space, where people are implying that their filter does things that it doesn't actually do. Again, like work with something that is actually NSF certified to remove a contaminant. Yeah. Because a lot of people are like, oh yeah, look at our lab test data. We did NSF standards, blah, 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 but they only did it for the first gallon of water. And we've seen this over and over and over again. Or they'll get like an NSF standard for like chlorine removal to make the water taste better, say they're NSF certified, and then out the other side of their mouth be like, oh yeah, we purify the water, and that kind of misleads people to say, oh yeah, this must remove stuff because it purifies the water. Purify is a marketing term. I don't believe it appears on our website anywhere. If it does, we need to fix that immediately. But yeah, like just
those buzzwords.
Demand to see data showing PFAS removal over the entire advertised lifetime of the filter.
Yeah.
And if it's done by NSF or WQA, even better. If it was covered by that Duke NC State study, I would argue that's even better because those tests were done in the homes of customers under real world conditions.
Yep. And it's,
Sorry, that was a little bit of a rant.
yeah, well, and the Duke study is more than just the two contaminants
Oh
that
yeah,
are
they
like,
covered. Oh,
yeah,
absolutely, they covered. Yeah, that's a really good point. Like they didn't just do PFOA, PFOS. They did a bunch of different PFAS. Same thing with NC State. So I think when our initial NC State, they did this aggregate measure of PFAS removal, and like
mm-hmm.
we'd removed over 99.4% or something like that, and that was like an aggregate measurement. I was just kind of clapping, silently behind that because obviously we're not affiliated with it, but it's always great to see your product shine
Yeah.
when others test it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so I think we can wrap things up. So in our bio, currently we have a link to the Wayland article. And we really wanted to prioritize Wayland just because this municipality was just hit with this really like frightening information. So that article is super informative. It breaks everything down so that it's really comprehensive so that like everyone can understand what's actually going on. And we also have a
I'm gonna
second
just pause for a moment there, Annalise. Like you're selling yourself short. Annalise does an incredible job breaking things down and delivering that information. So like seriously, like check out that article. That's
Yeah.
where I learn about the specifics for these things. It's a really good place. It's a really, really good starting point. And again,
Yeah.
even if you don't live in Wayland, look at Annalise's logic that she goes through when breaking this stuff down and start to ask yourself the questions like, could this be happening in my municipality?
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that we're going to continue to highlight municipalities where PFAS levels are off the charts. So definitely just keep an eye out for upcoming blog articles that might, be in your area, because we'll continue to update our viewers and our listeners just to make sure that everyone is on the same page with PFAS, because there's so much information as we just talked about. There's a lot going on. So just stay tuned. We have a ton of information on our blog, hydroviv.com. We cover basically every topic under the sun regarding drinking water. So check that out. You can also email us at hello@hydroviv.com. And you can also go to our homepage, hydroviv.com, and use our live chat function. And we have a team of scientists that are on our live chat ready to answer some of the most complex water quality questions imaginable.
But they won't do your homework. If you're a student, don't ask our science team to do your homework for you. That's something that's gonna, yeah, don't do that.
Yeah, no. You can also DM us on Instagram. Both of our Instagram handles are linked above. So reach out with any questions. We're really happy to help. We're just happy to provide this credible information. And so Eric, thanks for hopping onto this call. I think this was super informative for everyone. So.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. All right.
Have a great day,
Have
everyone.
a good one. Bye.